Preference, Karen?
What?
Do you want to open the meeting and then go to the budget, or do the budget workshop?
That's what I thought we would do. That's why we did executive session when we did. Remember, we changed it for that reason.
Okay. All right, then. We'll call the meeting to order. I'll stand for the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, consent agenda. Item 6A, meeting minutes from January 15th, regular Board of Education meeting. 8A, certification of lead evaluators. 8B, donation acceptance. 8C, donation acceptance. 8D, donation acceptance. And 8E, which is special education. Would anybody like any of those items removed, or do I have a motion to accept the consent agenda?
Before we do, Rick, can I bring something up?
Certainly.
I know that on the agenda, we had scheduled the budget work session first.
Yes.
That would be before we would take this step. It's okay with me, we go either way. I just want to acknowledge that in case we are expecting anybody to come for the meeting and would miss this point.
The budget.
Yeah. Well, the budget would be, the way we scheduled it was the budget was scheduled to go first at 5:45.
Correct.
Right, and then that would precede the opening of the meeting, and then the executive session, and then this step right here. And so I don't know if it makes a big enough difference to change it. I'm just wanted to raise that.
Concern with the consent agenda. Somebody might come in and object to, or
I just think
He
on this,
wasn't going to do executive session, I don't think. Right? You weren't going to do executive
no.
session.
Budget workshops right now,
Okay.
after the consent agenda.
Okay.
Yes. Yep.
Okay, so we'll do the consent agenda.
Apologize for
It's okay.
I'll make that motion.
Okay. Thanks, Dan. Second. Jeff, all in favor? Are we voting
No,
now?
I'm not. We're not now.
Aye.
Okay. Aye.
So who's seconded first and second? I'm so sorry.
Dan and Jeff.
Okay, thanks. And then everybody said yes.
So 4 yes, 0 no, motion passes. All right, we can enter into the budget work session. Roger, Dana.
We heard a door.
Okay. So I think that we're going to try and stick to the same general approach to this as we did the last time. So there's going to be a lot of similarities. So I'm going to walk us through it. I might go pretty quickly in terms of the pieces that we did last time. It won't always be the same, and not everything in here is the same. But so I'll try and mention that when that's the case, and hopefully it's reflected on the slides. But this is the agenda. It's really the same agenda as the last time, so we're walking our way through the process. This is now what we're calling the first draft. So the initial budget was pretty much getting ourselves started, but this first draft we're looking a little bit closer at the changes for this year. So Dana's been working hard at figuring out some of the changes in revenue and expenditures, and you're going to see some of those changes. Certainly not the last changes you're going to see, but you are going to see the start of that in this first draft budget. But just to emphasize, just because it's the second time we're talking about this is all still very preliminary. Our revenues and our expenditures are still very preliminary. They're not balanced. We don't expect them to be balanced at this point. There are some pieces that are the same. Our current staffing programs we're maintaining in this first draft budget. We are also preserving all materials and equipment in this first draft budget. Most of the salaries are based on actual contractual changes, but there's still some estimated salaries in here. And so it's not based 100% on actual salaries, but I would say it's very close. And then this budget, this first draft budget, already includes the anticipated retirements that the board is going to address later on in today's meeting. So, as you know, that's significant, and so Dana's been working hard at trying to figure out how we can calculate in those retirements and have a good estimate of our budget expenditures, especially in those areas of salaries and benefits. Some highlights. The highlights are the same. The CPIE was 2.44. We mentioned that last time. The allowable growth factor is 2.0%. That's as high as it can go with the property tax law, which is still temporary, although there's a movement to make that permanent now. Our property tax cap estimate based on the formula, it's still an estimate, but we think it's pretty darn close. 1.99%, so almost right at that 2% number. And this one does include the executive branch proposal. Now, last time you might remember that executive branch proposal came in the same day as our budget work session. Now we've had a couple of weeks to work on it, and Dana's been again working hard. But you're going to see some pieces of that in here as well. So on this page, I try and give you lots of numbers, and this is all reflected in the spreadsheets that Dana's going to talk about. But there have been some changes, and so rather than just making the changes, I actually crossed out what you looked at last time so that you could see the difference. Our salary increases are still based on the contract. That hasn't changed. Our BOCES increase is still an estimate of 4%. That hasn't changed, and it won't change until we know for sure, which will be in March. Our health insurance premium increase, we lowered the estimated increase there to 3% because that's closer to where we think it's going to land, but it's still an estimate. We'll know more next week. However, because we know we have additional positions now, but let me qualify that statement. We don't have additional positions in this budget in terms of new positions. What we have is retirees who will maintain their benefits and new employees who will come in at, we project, lower salaries, but also incur the cost of benefits. So the cost of those benefits, health insurance, is also included in here, which of course is an estimate because we don't know who we're going to hire, whether they're coming in on an individual plan or a family plan, those kinds of things, right? So there's some pieces in here we don't know, but we're doing as good a job as we can at making those estimates. The TRS numbers is the teacher retirement system. A pretty big expenditure for any school district, including ours. It was in at 11% because that's approximately what it was last year. And that was an increase over this year's expense of $87,000, but we made a change there. It's a significant change. We know that TRS is going to cost far less than it did last year. So rather than the 11% number, we're using the 9% number as an estimate. So that's 9% of all salaries that incur the TRS additional expense, and that's most of them.
So even with, I think there's 10 or 11 retiring, it's still a decrease coming as a projection? Yes.
So we don't, once somebody retires, we no longer contribute to their teacher retirement, but we do contribute to the new retirement. That'll be not only a lower percent, because it was 11% for this year, again, that's the estimate, 9% for next year, that's the estimate, but it's a lower percent on a lower salary.
Right. Okay.
So that's part of the decrease, but part of the decrease is 9% on all the salaries as opposed to 11% on all the salaries. So instead of an increase of 87,000 and change, you're going to see a decrease of 81,000 and change, and that's a big shift for this first draft budget. First draft, not initial draft. Change the title there. The ERS is still the same. But then in terms of the total first draft budget, again, you'll see all this again on the spreadsheets. So this total budget is still not within the tax cap, right? It's above the tax cap, and you can see by how much. So the total budget is coming in right now with what we have in here at that 19.7 number. That's 2.23% increase over this current year. The property tax levy is coming in at 16,331,397. That's 2.71%. As you know, that's higher than the tax cap of 1.99%. So right now, we have a gap of $430,554. So those are the numbers. And again, you'll see those all together. Now, in terms of the items, we started to make some changes, but we haven't made dramatic changes yet. And so this is a new page for everybody in here, and we've been working on this. We did include some new items in the first draft budget, and you can see here that they're items that we really started talking about pretty much last year, and so that's why they came in first. A lot of the items that have been coming through the future planning process are still in the not included area. So I'm just going to go through them. Included in this first draft budget is the cost of lacrosse. That's incurring an additional cost for us. We're also adding budget lines for Science Olympiad, which right now doesn't have one, for robotics, which also doesn't have one, and for state competitions. You know, when we send teams to Buffalo for the Final Four in hockey, or to the state cross-country meet in Long Island, we don't really have a line for that, so we're including that in there as well. Field maintenance equipment. We have very old equipment, and we're working on a plan to purchase new equipment. That's in here. Again, we started working on all these ideas last spring. Now, also in here is a reduction in the use of fund balance. And I'm going to let Dana talk about that later, so I'm just going to mention it now. But Dana's been working on a plan to reduce the amount of fund balance that we use as part of our revenue. So we'll let Dana talk about that later. I just want to give you a heads up that that's in here too. You'll see that in the revenue area. And then reductions to the extra duty payroll. You're going to see some reductions in salaries. Those reductions are not coming at the expense of any one particular employee or more. Where that's coming is, again, basing our estimates on what we are actually spending on extra duty. And we do have a lot of extra duty costs that we incur. There are some reductions in here, and you're going to see those in the salary. So again, Dana can explain more of those because there are many lines where you'll see in that 13-page document, I think in red, correct? Yeah, you'll see that in there. But there's still a lot that is not included in the first draft budget. So we're pulling this out of items that we have discussed at the school level, sometimes at the board level, and sometimes at the district administrative level. These are not in here. They may or may not ever get in here. These would be good sources of conversation. Jana will certainly be making recommendation as we go with this process. We want you to know that these are things that we're looking at, though, or at least that have come up, and so you know, we're gonna consider how, when, where, or whether or not to include these in the budget as we go. Fifth grade field trips. Right now we're sending fifth grade to Albany. The entire fifth grade is going to Albany. We did that this year. We'd like to continue to expand this idea of having entire grades of all kids having an opportunity to do something that they would not be able to do otherwise through school. Our 8th graders, as you know, go to DC. Our 11th graders have a once-in-a-lifetime chance to go to New York City this year, and we would like to make the 5th grade trip a regular thing. And we'd like to put some of that in the budget release. That's on the table. These all came out of the future planning. Indoor classroom gardens at the elementary school. Social worker, this came, we've discussed that here, we've discussed it at the future planning level. Social worker request was just a round number, $75,000 with benefits. Middle school, high school gymnasium refinishing. Our floor hasn't been refinished in many years. We're talking about approximately $10,000. Treadmill for the fitness room. If you go in there, you'll see we have some new equipment, but a lot of old equipment. We're looking to continue to roll that over as we go. Again, not in the budget yet. Middle school, high school art field trips. So our art program is looking to expose kids to museum opportunities. That would cost a little bit. We'd love to consider that for the future too. Choral risers for the elementary school. Their risers are aging. You know, we're talking about for concerts and those kinds of things. Summer curriculum funds. We had a few years in which we were able to accomplish a whole lot of planning over the summer by creating collaborative groups of teachers and teaching assistants and support staff to come in over the summer. We do pay them for that on a special rate, $21.50 for summer curriculum. We did that on a grant. We no longer get the grant. The grant was what we received when we were a focus school, which is The downside is you get labeled by the state as being underperforming in some area. The upside is they give you some money, and so we're using that money in part for a lot of planning. Love to be able to see some planning funds get in there out of the general fund. Again, not in the budget yet. Board's talked about a school resource officer. You know this conversation. I don't need to go over it with you. Just want to put it in there that the 20,000 number is of course the one that the board chose not to pursue at the time. That $75,000 number would be something more of a school district hired officer. Again, not in the budget. And then building aid revenue left off executive state aid run. This, again, I'm going to let Dana explain this, but essentially when we received our run from the executive branch, which was right about the time of our last budget session, there was a piece that was left off, and it was our building aid revenue came in $328,000 lower than we would expect. And so again, we did some digging trying to figure that out. This has to do with our capital bonds that we're paying off, and the fact that our new bonds haven't yet been put out there in circulation. And so we know the building aid reimbursement comes when you spend it, and it doesn't come because the governor grants it. It happens automatically. So we don't really see this $328,000 we do not see as a deficit. However, we would really like to see it in the executive run if it comes in February. It's certainly the legislative run that comes in April. So right now, you're going to see that $328,000 is not in our revenue. And again, Dana can point out where that is, but so that's still in the non-included category. And that's a pretty big chunk of money.
Roger, do you think it would be fair, I understand that this is a wish list of sorts, that we can revisit the topic of looking at that full-time math RTI person at the elementary school?
Right, so this is not an all-inclusive list. Yeah.
Right. So maybe just if we could venture into discussing that at some point. Who knows how it'll all play out, but.
Any other questions or comments about the included or not included list? You've seen this graph before, again, just trying to give people an idea of how the tax cap has shaped the budgeting process. Again, most of this has not changed. Our budgeting process is to continue to revise our revenue and expenses, consider future planning, and then make strategic changes. The still unknowns are still unknown. They haven't been known since our last meeting. But we do expect to hear about our health insurance premiums. Like I said, we're hoping next week.
3% is pretty impressive if you're able to
If
hold to that.
If we're able to hold to that, yes. And that's the benefit of a consortium, is that we determine our own premiums. We determine it based on reality.
Right.
And we know that reality right now, the reason why we're able to predict 3%, not 4%, is because we know reality looks pretty good right now. We know our health insurance reserve fund is very strong. And so, the preliminary discussions are, we don't expect it to go up very high.
No, that's great.
And that's a nice piece.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, but all of these amounts are going to be coming in as we go, and they're not in yet. The actual salary increases, some of those I think we could consider done once the board provides some kind of feedback on the remaining salaries that are undetermined right now. And I think I've got some information to the board in tonight's meeting on that, so you could take a look at that. And again, I think we can finalize those whenever you're ready. Our special education costs, right now we have the same amount in there as we had last year. Do I think that we're going to have the same special education services as last year? No, I don't. But we don't really know for sure right now, so we're not going to make any big changes to that unless we have some more information.
Do you think they're going to go up or down?
So my optimistic side says it's going to go down.
I'm
allowed to say that? I think so. We'll see.
We won't hold you to it. Thank you.
You've been quoted.
Yeah.
That's right.
On camera.
Exactly.
You heard it here. Go to YouTube.
So Dane's going to go through the list again. This is the overview, the details, the revenue, the tax cap calculation, which has not changed, by the way, since last time, and then the budget reduction schedule. You want to take it from here? Or do you want any questions or comments before we go on to Dana? Okay, you want to take it from here, Dana?
Sure.
So we're looking at the budget estimates.
This is 3C.
Really highlighting the biggest difference from the last time is the salary increases is down because I've gone in with knowing that we had right now 11 potential retirees putting in estimates for their replacements. That resulted in a fairly significant decrease in the salaries. FICA hasn't changed. The employee retirement hasn't changed. Teachers' retirements, that has gone down. And Roger kind of explained why. We didn't get that final number last week. TRS is saying this is what it's going to be for next year. Health insurance. There's a change there. Originally it was lower, but as we saw the number of retirees that had put the paperwork in to retire, seeing a cost shift from some salaries to the health benefits, because as Roger was explaining, basically we will be putting 11 additional people on our health benefit, potentially. I mean, we could hire someone and they decline the health coverage. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen. But at this moment in time, it's a safe bet to say 11 positions opening. We're going to have 11 new policies that we're going to have to put on, whether it's a family, individual, or super family. That's unknown until you hire the person. So there's a shift there. The dental and workers' comp, those haven't changed, as well as the BOCES and the program increases. That number is basically the same. But if you're looking at last time to this time, there is a change. It's almost $300,000 difference in terms of reduction. So we're sitting about $430,000 still. That is the gap.
Dana, if someone opts out of health insurance, let's say, for example, that their husband or wife has it at their place of employment, do they get a stipend or something if they don't take access of that benefit?
Good question. I would have to look. I honestly don't know. I know at one time contracts did, but I don't know if ours does any longer.
Yeah, so the answer to that is that they don't.
Okay.
And that makes us different than some other school districts and some other organizations where there is that's part of the benefit package in the contract. We don't have that.
Okay, I was just curious.
Questions on the budget estimate? The next one is, it's that 13-page. I mean, you don't see it all here in the PowerPoint. You're just seeing the first page, but I do believe it's in.
It's 3D.
It's the attachments. 13 pages. Basically, an overview, a pretty in-depth look at the line items. You'll see the last two columns is where the adjustments are made, proposed adjustments. I don't know if you want me to go through page by page to kind of highlight some things. If you have specific questions about any of the items. I mean, the first two pages are pretty straightforward. There are no real changes. And that is dealing with the administrative pieces in terms of expenses for the business office, the superintendent's office, the principals, things like that. All supervision, all falls under these. So the only real change you see there on page 3, you'll see there's a $500 change in supervision, contractual, elementary, and that's really just a shift. Moving $500 out of that line to another line. So it's not really, it's a reduction in that line, but it's not a reduction in the overall budget line. Page 4, you'll see that there are more changes, and that's where you're starting to see in terms of some reductions in overall salaries. And again, that reflects the 11 potential retirees, is significant there in terms of the teachers instructional, 50,000 for K-5, 100,000 for 6 through 12. And these numbers are still estimate as we go through and all that, but felt fairly confident that those were kind of safe numbers in terms of reductions. Summer school salary, looking at the historical, what we've spent over the last couple of years, reducing that. The rest of the items, those are more shifts in where the money is being allocated. As Roger said, teaching materials and things like that, that amount is staying consistent. It's not being reduced. They just, when we met with the principals, they asked to shift money to different accounts so that they could put, focus on certain things. So that's really where you're seeing those difference is just that. Because as you go through there, you'll see, a great example. There's an increase in teaching contractual testing supports is $6,000 there. Again, that's a result of a change. Page 5, a change in materials for art at the elementary. Again, that's a shift of money within the elementary school. On page 6, there are the biggest changes again is in salaries. That's under special ed for teachers at elementary, as well as teaching assistants elementary and teaching assistant high school. And those reflect largely too in terms of the number of TAs that are retiring there. So we're going to potentially see a decrease in salaries based on the hiring of new staff.
So that's totally new staff, again, sort of like the 148,000.
Right, yeah, that's basically more a reflection. And again, those are estimates.
Right.
Looking at it saying, well, if we typically hire a TA at this, we generally don't bring a TA in that has 20 years of experience, and they come in at a higher salary. Generally speaking, if we hire a TA, they're probably within 0 to 5 years of experience. Yep. Page 7, you'll see reductions there with salaries as well, and that's computer. And again, that's a reflection of a retirement. Further down on the page, guidance material, that's just a shift as to where the elementary principal wanted money. No real changes on pages 8 and 9. Oh, I didn't highlight. And Roger brought this up. Okay, we were not there yet. All right. No changes on 10. When we get to, I wanted to highlight the changes for the addition to robotics and science Olympiad. So my apologies. Back on page 8. So there is some changes there on page 8. You don't see them in the adjustments because they're new. So if you look under co-curricular activities on page 8, added science Olympiad and robotics at $3,000 each. So in terms of it's not an adjustment, it is technically an adjustment because we're never there, but I didn't put it in that middle column because I'm not taking away from a previous amount. But that's where, in terms of trying to fund science Olympiad and robotics. And then the other changes is on page 9. Under athletics, as Roger indicated, we have boys lacrosse, page 8 and page 9. Boys lacrosse, adding $1,000 for contractual costs of referees and things like that. Adding $300 in terms of materials. One of the additional expenses this year was we had to buy uniforms this year for the boys. We had to buy some balls. Luckily, there are lacrosse nets, already. The field that we're going to be using does have lacrosse nets, so we don't have to go out and purchase nets like that. But funding that going forward. as well as you'll see that there is $3,000 for state competitions as well.
And under the athletic director, there's a $1,400 increase.
Yes, that truly reflects the stipend that's contractual.
Okay.
Yes, yeah, so, yes, that was,
Okay.
yeah. That is based off of next year's, what that amount is. No real changes on page 10 or 11. So really, you get to the ends, we're looking at right now with adjustments, $19,722,000. Questions on the appropriation side?
I just have a quick question. Under transportation, do we know how much money, I know it's probably not in this one, that we use for St. Agnes, all the St. Agnes stuff?
So there's so the UPK grant covers the cost of the St. Agnes pre-K bus. It does not cover the cost of the elementary buses that stop at St. Agnes. We don't have that one
That doesn't-
broken down.
right.
You're right.
The
Yeah.
UPK bus, we do have broken down, but you won't see it in here because it's in a special account, right? Is that how it works?
Our funding is through a special account.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not in your general budget.
Right.
Because it's in a special grant.
So then, when they do special trips, like if the school itself does a special trip,
We see it on like the bus driver that they put it on their extra duty or payroll sheet, but it's not broken out any differently than that. So I could look through the records and say I could tell you who drove it and how long, but in terms of we don't have a separate appropriation line to indicate transportation for St. Agnes. It's kind of all rolled into the transportation budget.
and that includes their summer program.
Oh, right.
Yes.
Right. So yeah, you're not going to see that broken out. It's coming out of the general line.
Other questions on the appropriation side? The last page there is the revenue. I don't know if did
I
you,
put it on the
you
bottom.
put it on the bottom. Except, yeah.
It's page 14.
So when we look at the revenue side, the property tax, that is the same as last time, the 15,943. That does reflect a 1.99 increase in the tax levy. As Roger said, looking at it, I don't see that changing. Not a lot of variation there because of the way the formula. I mean, it's a set formula, but there are certain numbers that we're given, and as I explained last meeting, one of those, the allowable growth factor, was 0. Last year it was 0.1, and that was a difference of almost $60,000. So for whatever reason, our district got a 0 for growth factor for this coming year. And I mean, I've looked at it, all the other schools, and I don't see a rhyme or reason. Obviously, someone who's doing it has a rationale for it, but I guess
Or maybe not.
or maybe not. And maybe it's in our. I mean, I don't know the formula. I just know ours is 0, but Au Sable could be 0.012, and Saranac Lake could be 0.03. I mean, it's looking at it, going, okay, what is. I suppose if I dug deeper, I could probably get a rationale as to how it comes up, but it is part of the formula. So right now it's. And it's not going to change, so it's set for the year. We won't get a different number in 6 weeks before the budget passed for that portion of it. And as a result, the tax cap is 2%. So because of the CPI-U being higher than that, so that is again a number that does adjust from year to year. Looking at some of the other estimated revenue, we do have a pilot. Again, so that's $4,000 that will be coming in. I left most things here the same at this point: interest on taxes, tuition, and day school individuals, that basically, an estimate in terms of students that want to come here and things like that. That kind of fluctuates from year to year as well. One change I did make was through game admissions from individuals. I lowered that by 1,000 right now. What you're seeing is we're not seeing revenue coming from that. So, why keep using a number there that if we're not getting, hitting that number, hitting that target, why keep it at a number that's not there? So as we go through the, before the budget, I'll keep looking at that and try to make it accurate as possible. But I don't think we collect revenue from contests. I mean, generally, if it's collected, it's for a group or something, and it becomes part of a fundraiser, more so than back to us. It goes to a group.
What is our individual tuition day student fee for someone that wants to come in? Like 2,000, 2,500?
Karen has it memorized.
Oh.
Kindergarten through 5th grade is $1,400,
Okay.
and 6 through 12 is $1,680
Wow.
Per semester?
for the year.
Oh, for
Very
the year.
reasonable.
And if you
It hasn't
are
changed.
employed here, right, it's a
Right,
reduction.
if you work here, it's cheaper.
Yeah.
20%.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Uh, International students, however, do have a special
Okay.
tuition rate.
Okay, so if you have study abroad students here, that would fall into that category?
Yeah.
Okay.
That special rate is lower, I think.
It's higher.
Oh, it's higher.
Yeah.
Oh,
And it reflects the agency, so we're working in cooperation with an agency, and then because they're international students, we're also providing some additional services and items, lunch, etc., things like that. So.
Looking at the other groups, kept all the same, starting with gross state aid, BOCE aid, transportation aid. These are all numbers that we got from the first executive run that came out literally the day of our last meeting. Where you see that change that Roger talked about, significant changes under other state aid. You'll see last year, this current year, it was at $651,907. Right now, it's currently at $347,797. Because, as Roger indicated, there was a difference of $327,000 in the first run specific to building aid. If you look at some of the other things from last year's executive budget proposal to this year, there actually was a slight increase in most of the categories except for that one. And as Roger mentioned, that's a pretty set number. It's based off building units, and it's based off. So that's not something that is at the whim of the governor or the legislature. They don't set that amount. That is based off a formula. And as it happens, because we have a couple, we have some debt coming off, a little over $1 million in debt we're done paying for it this year. What they saw when they first ran it was $1 million less in debts. Whereas after the last meeting, I called and emailed our fiscal advisor, because that's who sets up our debt schedule, and asked a question about this, and basically came up with, because this is what they see. They didn't see what is net. So they were able to say, oh yeah, what number do you want for debt? Because we do have a ban. So we do have that, the bond anticipatory note that we got last spring. So we technically do have debts that we can connect to this. And I just asked, here's what the number I'm looking for, set up our debt schedule to reflect what we're currently have in debt for those two bonds, a little over $1 million.
So presumably that number would go up
Yes.
once those bonds are issued for the capital project. Or
That's
before.
that's our thought process as well. Absolutely, because the answer I got back was, yeah, they probably didn't see it.
Right.
Once next runs will come, they will see that your bond schedule has been updated to reflect that. I'm hoping that with the limestone project, It's, SED is considering a capital overlay where you can basically do a capital project in a year at no more than $100,000. That I just sent in that paperwork to kind of get that in the process of being seen as building aid as well.
And that'll fall into that same line item.
Yes, same line item. as
So
well.
when you issue the bonds, is there some upper limit on the amount of other state aid they give you for building aid? Or is it just based on the amount of debt?
It's expense based, so it's whatever our expenses are.
Right.
So that could conceivably go up quite a bit.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, it's based on, because they look at, I mean, there's, as I got into, I met with the fiscal advisor back in December, and we talked about all of these things. And yes, your debt and the value of your debt and basically the value of your building. Just like with anyone, you can only take out as much as what the building is worth, and they play into what is your other debts to those buildings. And it's not to the district, it's to each individual building. So that plays a role in it too, is what do you currently have for debts on these buildings, these other bonds? What is the value of those buildings? And then they do their math and says, okay, this is what is basically aidable. You can borrow this amount of money, but you can only get aid on this amount because you still have an outstanding debt of whatever amount. So they do look at your debt to value ratio as well.
Thanks.
Is there any possibility of retrieving that 300,000?
Yeah, I think so, because once
How much?
I believe so, because when our fiscal advisor, when I was talking to her about it, she's like, oh yeah, what amount is coming off the books? And it was like a little over $1 million was coming off the books. She says, okay, I can set up a debt schedule to reflect 1920 having $1 million that you have to pay in debt, which that's what we're doing this year for those two bonds. And she's like, yeah, I can do that and set that debt schedule up. That then gets submitted to state ed to reflect that we do have that bonds in place and that debt that we are going to be paying starting next year. So yes, and our fiscal advisor thought the same thing, that building aid should be,
So it seems like this is almost like a timing issue more than anything else.
Yes. Yeah. We were concerned when we first saw the number, and that's why I had to dig into it and to find out. And luckily, got some good answers in that.
Great.
So that was the biggest difference, and you'll see too that under the appropriated reserve fund balance, a reduction there. Last year, this current year, having a number of $520,000, and right now going with an estimate in terms of $452,135,000. And really what that comes down to is when you look at it with an appropriated reserve fund balance, we're using it as revenue, and it's not really revenue. And everything as I'm going through it and really digging deeper into this, it's more of a short-term solution as opposed to it's something you should do year in, year out. Rely on your appropriated fund balance to act as revenue. So trying to figure out a way over time to reduce that number. And again, right now it's a work in progress, and finding that balance between balancing the budget, keeping all the programs in place, and seeing what we can use or not use for that fund balance, appropriate fund balance. I think so. If you look at our historical trend, we've been very fortunate in terms of our appropriated funds and what we actually spend year in and year out. We're not diving into our fund balance to pay for things at the end of the year, which is good. It's very, we're very fiscally responsible over the years. The goal is to continue that, but also to see how we can reduce that amount so that it's not being seen as revenue.
Thank you.
Yep.
So is it, sort of in layman's terms, is it basically they're considering savings as revenue?
Yes, yeah, because it's
The
in our-
savings account, or yeah.
Yeah, it's in our check accounts, you know, and you look at our accounts, and when we do those treasury reports, it's part of our balance, if you will. Yes, that's a good way of putting it. It's sort of like dipping into our savings to balance our checkbook, you know, type of deal.
Yeah, just to be clear, it's a practice that is actually recommended by the Office of State Comptroller, which to me is counterintuitive. But especially when you're over the 4% mark, and that's that 4% cap. That's an artificial cap, but it's real. But we're supposed to stick to it. Right now, we're over it because of BOCES capital project. So as you know, as much as I agree with you all that I think it sounds like an unsustainable practice, the State Comptroller sees it as a way for districts to, I guess, adhere to that 4% cap.
Questions on the revenue side? The property tax calculation, that hasn't changed from the last meeting. That shows basically the formula in a spreadsheet in terms of how to come up with the 1.99 allowable levy. We'll have a more firm number. The property tax cap report card is due March 1st. Roger had that in the slide, so by March 1st I do have to submit a report card to the states in terms of what that number is going to be. And then we have the budget reduction schedule, basically looking at where we have to be. We're $430,000 basically different right at this point in time. When you look at the tax levy as it shows, if it was the current budget, it's going to be a $16 million tax levy. We're pretty certain that's not going to be the case. It's got to be more in that 15.9 tax levy in terms of what we can raise in taxes. That's more of a reality, closer to reality than the 16.3. So as we get closer to you guys approving the budget, and we hear more from the state in terms of aid and things like that. Looking at more numbers with health insurance, kind of getting an even better feeling in terms of salaries and things like that, and continue to adjust accordingly.
So just to finish up, this is our second work session, so we'll cross that line off. On the February 5th line, we have additional work sessions if needed on February 26th, March 19th. We have, as Dana just pointed out, the tax levy limit submission deadline of March 1st. We have a work session and a final budget draft due on April 2nd. The board is in. We've scheduled the board vote on the budget for April 2nd. After that, we have the usual budget hearings and then the budget vote on May 21st. And again, we do invite people to raise questions, or provide comments or feedback on our budget. I think the last meeting, the discussion was, is there another place for this slide in addition to this particular meeting? And I believe we put it on the newsletter.
The newsletters.
Yeah, yep. So that's been out there. I think that's everything.
Right.
Any questions or comments from the board?
Just a comment. I mean, this process is so simplified from my first couple of years on the board, and it really helps move things along, I think, in a greater understanding of where we are and how we need to progress or have progressed. So thank you very much for all your work. Make that 400,000 and we're there.
If I had some assurance in terms of our building aid,
I could spend some for you.
Thanks.
That unknown right there.
All right. Any other questions, comments, or are we all set? So we'll end the budget work session and now enter into the proposed executive session for purpose of discussing tenure. May I have a motion to enter into executive session?
Yes.
Yes.
Who's the first?
Who's calling?
Colleen, second. Joe. There's too many voices going. We're going to vote or just aye?
I did by unanimous.
Okay.